from FileMaker with ease. My name is Will Slaughter, and I'll be your instructor today. I'm a developer at 360Works and the primary developer of the 360Works Zulu 2 software. The FM Academy is the consortium of leading FileMaker development companies in the United States, bringing you monthly training seminars for free. All slides and materials, including a video recording of the webinar, will be posted on the FM Academy website shortly after the presentation. If you have any other questions or need to get more information about any 360Works products, including Zulu 2, you can reach us on the web at 360works.com or send us an email at infobox@360works.com. You can also find us on most major social media sites. So a little bit about me. I've been a developer at 360Works for 2.5 years. I started with FileMaker 11, and I'm certified in 11 and 12. I work on products as well as consulting at 360Works, and have made major contributions to Zulu and the MirrorSync product. So just a little introduction to Zulu. Zulu 2 is a server-side application. It has two primary functions, the first being sharing calendar data with CalDAV clients and synchronizing event data with the cloud-based services Google and Exchange, as well as Office 365. So this is just a visual representation that gives you an idea of the way Zulu works. It runs on your FileMaker server, typically runs on the same machine as your FileMaker server, and communicates with the server using the FileMaker XML custom web publishing engine. And then, as you can see, we have these CalDAV clients down towards the bottom of the diagram. They're communicating over standard HTTP communication. And that's a very immediate push-pull kind of synchronization. It's different than our Google Calendar and Exchange Sync, which you can see at the top, which we communicate with using proprietary APIs that run a synchronization on a timed interval basis. So with this allows you to publish your FileMaker data to a myriad of different devices, including web browsers, Android devices with Google, and any Microsoft-enabled device that can run Outlook. So I'm going to really quickly switch over, and we're going to do some demos. Okay, so I have my Apple Calendar open here. I've got my calendars. I'm going to refresh real quick to get an update on those calendars. Okay, so this reflects the data that I have in my event management database, which I have modified ever so slightly to accommodate Zulu. I'll go into that a little bit later on. So I just wanted to demonstrate really quickly the speed and simplicity for modifying events that are published through Zulu. I'm going to focus on Joe's show, this August 27th event here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move it to the 28th because Joe's show got rescheduled. And you can see there that immediately updated my event in FileMaker. And at the same time, I can make modifications such as I can remove some of this information. I can change the title a little bit. And when I make those changes, I'm going to see that populate immediately in FileMaker. And so you may be wondering how easy it is to get this sort of thing set up. So I'm going to actually demonstrate our sample file just very shortly so that you can get an idea for the simplicity. So let me pull it over from my other screen. So this is what you get when you download Zulu. You get a download with some installers and then this sample file. And this sample file is actually the only tool that you need aside from FileMaker Pro and FileMaker Server to get Zulu integrated with your solution. The first thing I'm going to demonstrate is our field mapping layout. The field mapping layout is the most crucial part of this integration process. As you can see, we have a little red box around this layout that says copy and paste this into your file, and some instructions over on the right to help you along. So what you do is you enter layout mode, you copy all the elements inside of this little red box, and then you just move over to your database. You'd open the layout screen, create a new layout, and paste those right in. And I'll show you my integration right here. I'm not going to go through all the field mapping right now. Okay, so you can see this is a very similar layout. There's just no decoration on my event management layout. But when you first paste in these layout elements, most of these fields are going to say, all of these fields actually are going to say field missing. And what we use for mapping these fields is object names. So what you do is just double-click each missing field and choose the field that relates to that data. And we're using these object names, as you can see, my PK event, my summary, my start date, and you can use the labels over to the left of the field to make it pretty easy. You'll probably need to add a couple of fields that you don't already have in your database, and those are just internal Zulu fields like this UUID and iCal data. All right, I'm going to move on to publishing the calendar. So the Zulu calendar list is a required table for your Zulu integration, and this describes all the different calendars that you have. Oh, this table is actually pasted in from our sample file as well. Actually, I'm going to go back real quick. I feel like I skipped a little too much there. So not only do you need to paste your field mapping layout, but we also paste in the schema for this calendar list, and there are also several scripts that need to be pasted in. So you can see this script folder actually says copy these scripts to your solution. These are required for validating the data in your events, publishing the calendar, and then these last two, which I'll get into a little bit later, are our script hooks, which allow you to customize Zulu's functionality a little bit more. So the Zulu calendar list table is not going to map to any existing table that you have. It's a Zulu-specific table. And it contains things like the database name, the layout name where the events are mapped, the name of the calendar, and then a couple of other various storage fields. So let's move over to publishing. You will publish from your field mapping layout. We give you a button here that once you paste in these layout elements will be hooked up to the publish script. So real quick, I'm just going to hit that. Opens up a browser, and our calendars have been published. We have a couple of different sections here to show us what we can do once we've published. So I'm going to use this to create a new iCal calendar. Switching back over to iCal, what I'm going to do is just go into my accounts. I'm going to remove this one that I have here because it's just going to be a duplicate. And I'm going to go and choose Other Account. This is a CalDAV client, so we're going to be adding it as a CalDAV account. All we need is the username and password for the database, and that URL we just copied from the publish screen. So I've created an account to use specifically for this purpose. All right, and that's all there is to it. You can see my events popped up in the back there. And like you saw earlier, these are instantaneously updating. However, if you want to make changes from your FileMaker solution, iCal works on a interval polling schedule, so about every 15 minutes it will check for changes in events. So if I make a change here, we're not going to see that immediately pull in over here. We can see the 360Works meeting. However, if I go ahead and force iCal to refresh, then we can pull that event up and see that it changed. And Zulu actually is tracking more than just the summary and the description of the event. We also store email alerts. We actually store several different types of alarms. This specifically is storing an email alert, and this is storing our location, and we can also add invitees using Zulu's alarm feature. So I'm going to switch over from CalDAV now towards the syncing side of things. So bear with me while I juggle my windows around a little bit. All right, so I have a Google Calendar here and an Office 365 calendar. These two are already set up and syncing. This is my Zulu Sync admin page. This is our interface for configuring all of your sync configurations. I'm really quickly just going to demonstrate these syncs running because I don't think I have any changes here. Nope. All right. All right, I'm going to switch to, oops, there we go. Okay, so that change I just made in FileMaker, or in iCal, where I switched 360Works Meeting to at the office, you can see that that change is already propagated over to Google. And this is very useful because it's typically Android devices are not going to have a CalDAV compliant application for consuming calendar data. So if you have users that are running on iOS devices and Android devices, you can push your calendar data from your FileMaker solution to either of those users, as well as Windows Phone and tablet users using Office 365 or Exchange. Let me just enable this calendar real quick. Okay, so we've got a very, very similar set of events here. And another useful use case for Zulu is we can use this to keep our Exchange calendar in sync with our Google Calendar. So if I make a change in my Google Calendar, I can synchronize that change back to FileMaker and then subsequently synchronize that change over to Exchange. And I can set up an auto sync to make this happen on a regular interval without interaction from me at all. So every 5 seconds, these guys are going to launch and keep my data in sync. All right, so I want to move on to one of the more intensive features of Zulu, which is our calendar filtering abilities. So often you're going to want to have multiple calendars that different users can access without being able to see each other's events. So if you have a team of people who need a personal calendar, and then maybe they need to see a shared set of events as well, you can configure that using the Zulu calendar list table. So I'm going to demonstrate really quickly just setting up a filtered calendar to show my active events instead of all my events. This is very simple. All I need to do is just duplicate this. I'm going to remove my colors so that they're not matching colors. And then I'm going to use the Zulu filter key and Zulu filter value fields. So I'm going to show you in my field mapping layout my filter fields. So you can see this filter by field right here. If I go into layout mode, that's my status field. And this is just a dummy field to indicate whether or not my events are active or already expired. So back in the Zulu calendar list table, the filter key is just going to be the name of the field. It doesn't need to be fully qualified because we already know which layout we're using to access it. So my status field is my filter field, and I want active projects in this calendar. I'm going to change this one to active events. So the very first thing to note is that we don't need to republish the calendar when adding a new calendar. Publishing keeps track of your field mapping, but any other modifications you're making to Zulu can typically be done without publishing again. And the easiest way to see this in action is just go over to iCal and refresh. And we should see a second calendar pop up here. And if we toggle it on and off, you can see only some of these events are on the active calendar, because the active calendar is only showing me my active status events. All right. Because we just set up a filtered calendar, I would like to get those events in my Google Calendar so that my Android users can see which events are active and which are not. So I'm going to set up a new sync configuration here. And this is using our new configurator, which is a step-by-step wizard style, trying to make the configuration as easy as possible. So we're going to do active events. I'm just going to hook this up to my standard event management database. I already have an all events, so I'm just going to sync the active events. Right now we're authenticated. I could sync to an existing calendar. This is a new feature of Zulu 2. We allow you to choose any calendar that you already have in Google. However, I don't have one set up right now, so I'm going to let Zulu create it for me. And it was as easy as that. I've got my active event calendar here. I'm going to synchronize it, and we should be able to jump over to Google and see those events. All right, my brown calendar is my active events calendar. I've got a few duplicates here because we do share some active events with all events. However, you can see how this could be useful for creating a calendar for an individual user or creating calendars for specific groups and keeping those calendars separate from each other. And we can actually even further separate those by using record level access privileges on the Zulu calendar list table. If Zulu can't access a record in the calendar list table, then it's not going to acknowledge that calendar's existence. So you could set a sync configuration up with a single with a single user, and with the privilege set that restricts them to only see 1 or 2 calendar list records, and then they would never be able to access those other calendars. So it's a good way to keep things secure and private. All right, so I think I'm going to jump back over to the slides for a little while and go over some of the more detailed information about Zulu. Okay, so I went over this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to just kind of go into more detail on how simple Zulu is. It's very, very easy to set up your field mapping. You paste your schema and map your fields. We don't require any custom scripting for selecting events to sync. We use a sync framework that is based off of modification time since the last sync ran. So we can tell what records have been modified, deleted, or added without having to actually script out your tables or anything like that. I talked about the step-by-step wizard-style configuration process, which actually introduces some more dynamic features in for the sync configurations. For instance, you can configure individual sync interval times. So you might use your FileMaker solution as a backup tool to keep your Exchange event data stored redundantly. If you were to do that, then you would set that configuration up using a sync interval of perhaps once a day. Because you don't need that to run all the time, you could save the network traffic, you could save the machine resources, but you would also perhaps want people to access those calendars via CalDAV or via their Android devices. And you would want those to sync a little bit more often so that when changes were made in Exchange, you would have immediate updates for your Google users and immediate updates in your CalDAV calendar. So it's just a good way to compartmentalize the sync configurations a little more and get more control. So we talked about custom event filtering a little bit, but we did not talk so much about the customizable script hooks. I'm going to stop the presentation really quickly and jump back over to my event management database to demonstrate the script hooks a little bit. So I talked about the 2 scripts that we run, our post-edit script and our pre-delete script. So these scripts are going to run whenever you make a change from a CalDAV client, either after the event was edited or before the event was deleted. Now, something important to note about Zulu is that we don't actually delete any events. We have a field called the Zulu deleted field. And what happens is if a CalDAV user deletes an event, or if an Exchange or Google user deletes an event, When that synchronizes back to FileMaker, we're actually going to write a 1 in this field, and that indicates to Zulu that this event is deleted. It won't touch it again, but it will allow you to undelete if you like. So something you can do with the pre-delete script, the pre-delete script will allow you to force Zulu to delete events. So if you actually do want them gone, you can catch it in the pre-delete script and just call delete record, and it'll remove the record, it won't write a 1, and that record will be gone. The post-edit script works very similarly. It runs after an event has updated, after an event is created. And this can be useful for instance, say you need to store more information than just a summary, a description, and a location. Say you need to store contact information with a name, an email address, a phone number, and perhaps let's say you need to store a name, an email address, and a phone number. So what you could do is you could create your events in iCal with specific delimiters between these data values, and then in your post-edit script, you would parse the description out using those delimiters, and you could create related data. You could update contact records. There's an endless possibilities for what you could do with that. I've had users specifically request that ability, and we've scripted out very complex systems that allow creation of contacts, updating existing contacts, etc. So that's a really cool feature on the CalDAV side of things. All right, we're going to get back to the presentation. So I talked a little bit earlier about syncing to existing calendars. This is really a pretty nice feature to have, because you can actually consume public calendars from that are published either on Google or Exchange. You can also hook up to your existing calendar that you already have without requiring Zulu to create that calendar for you. And we actually have a system in place that will attempt to match up the records that exist in both sides so that we prevent the creation of duplicates. Another new feature in Zulu 2 is having multiple sync configurations. In Zulu 1, you could sync one FileMaker file with several Google accounts. With Zulu 2, we actually allow you to specify a FileMaker file for each individual configuration. And that can be useful because you might not have all of your event data in a single database. I actually didn't touch on sync directions either. Let's look at that really quickly. So you can see each of my configurations here has a little green arrow pointing in both directions between my FileMaker calendar and my Google or Exchange calendar. This means that it's a bidirectional sync, and we're going to get event updates on both Google and in FileMaker. So I'm going to make a directionality. We're going to use the same event management database. Let's say we're going to sync all events. Once we're authenticated, we get to our actual calendar mapping. So here we can just click on this direction button, and it will switch our direction from read-write to read-only in either direction. So if I wanted to sync, I'm going to have this actually sync to, I'm going to have it create a new calendar for me because we already have all of our events syncing bidirectionally. So now if I were to, you can see this directionality demos, my arrow reflects the direction that I selected. So if I sync this, we'll actually have all of our, oh, it looks like I've actually got it backwards. Nope, we're syncing to the same calendar. That Google is referring to our calendars by name, and so it's, I think it's gotten a little bit confused there. So let's jump back to the presentation. All right, as I mentioned before, Zulu's tracking more data than just the event title and the start and end date. We track the location and the URL as well as attendees now in Google and Exchange. And attendees are cool because you can actually have Google and Exchange send out notifications when an event is created, changed, or canceled. So that can be really helpful if you have if you use an Exchange server for business and you need everyone to be notified when a meeting is scheduled or when canceled or if something changes. Our alarm support is a little different for Google and Exchange because they don't match up exactly with the CalDAV standard. So with CalDAV, whereas you have an alert, an alarm that actually plays, makes a noise on your machine. When you have a Google Calendar and you're not using an Android device or you're not using a Windows phone with Exchange, there's not really much of a concept of an alert. But the attendees make up for that by sending emails and alerting people that way. So a little bit of the nitty-gritty of Zulu 2. We've rewritten the sync engine. It synchronizes much more quickly with Google and syncs more quickly with Exchange than Zulu 1 was capable of doing. Your actual speed obviously will be determined by the hardware and network that you're running on, but we've switched to using batched write operations, which not only improves the performance but also reduces the amount of network traffic that needs to go up to Google or Exchange and back. I ran a benchmark last week that I synced 10,000 events to my Google Calendar, and I noticed that they were syncing at about 1,500 records per second, which is quite a significant improvement over Zulu 1. So I want to talk just very briefly about pricing. We have two licensing models for Zulu. The first is the workgroup calendar, which supports up to 5 calendars and sync configurations. Those are not exclusive. So, I'm sorry, those are exclusive. So you can have 5 calendars syncing with 5 sync configurations. So one sync configuration doesn't take away from the number of calendars that you have. Our second licensing tier is the enterprise license, which opens up the licensing to unlimited. You have as many calendars as you can publish and as many sync configurations as you can bear to look at on that screen. Zulu is included in the portfolio license, so if you're a portfolio license holder, you've already got Zulu, and if you're not, feel free to download the demo version, which works for 2 hours. And that should allow you to test and make sure that your integration is going to work and that you can map all your fields up and everything like that. All right. So before the presentation is over, I wanted to let you guys know about the next FM Academy webinar. Next webinar is Options for Licensing FileMaker Platform. You will learn to understand the different options for connecting your users to a FileMaker solution. You'll learn to select licensing options that best fit your company, and you'll learn to accurately predict the annual cost of using FileMaker. And if you want to get more information about the next webinar or this webinar that we are currently doing, you can visit the FM Academy website at FileMakerAcademy.com, or you can email us at webinar@FileMakerAcademy.com. Now, if you would like to have any help setting Zulu up or any other 360Works tool, you can contact us or any of these other affiliates from FM Academy. All right, so I think we're going to do a few questions now. All right, so the first question is, when is it mandatory to publish your calendar again? You will only need to republish your calendar if the field mappings have changed. So if you had a start date set to one field and it changed to another, that's a good time to republish. But if you need to create a calendar, remove a calendar, etc., no need to republish. Okay, so next question, upgrade pricing. You can actually check on our website, 360works.com, for upgrade pricing. we've Okay, so we have a question, any support for Apple's calendar server for syncing? Zulu is actually taking the place of Apple's calendar server. Apple's calendar server is a CalDAV server itself, and so we're essentially using your FileMaker data to replace Apple's calendar server. We do not sync to the calendar server itself. Oh, I think I must have misspoke. My test said 1,500 records per second. I said 1,500 records per second. My slide said 1,500 records per minute. I just want to clarify that that's 1,500 records per minute. Okay, so the next question is how can we integrate to iCal Calendar? And I think what the question is, what is being asked is how do we get our calendar data into iCal and onto our iOS devices? And the way that you do that is when you publish the calendars, as I demonstrated earlier, you're given a URL which you can then use to create an iCal account. I'll go ahead and republish my calendars real quick so you guys can see that again. So here's our published page. Once you expand this section here, you can see that we have a URL that was generated by the publishing script. And this is all you need along with your FileMaker username and password in order to set your iCal calendar up. Okay, so the next question is, can you give more information on the Exchange integration? I'm not sure specifically what this user is, which specific information the user would like, but our Exchange integration is fully featured. It is very similar to the data that we're syncing is very similar to Google. We sync all the events time information as well as the location, the title, description, and the attendees list. And we support both optional and required attendees. Okay, I'm going to do a little demonstration of setting up an Exchange synchronization. I think we might have overlooked that a little bit. So I'm going to clean these guys up a little bit if you guys don't mind. All right, so we're going to start with a blank slate, and I'm going to rename my calendar so that we're not stepping on our own shoes. So this is a good example of when I don't need to republish. All I did was change the name in the Zulu calendar list. It does require, if you have a sync configuration already set up, if you were to change the name of the calendar, you would want to reconfigure that sync. And that goes for most changes in the calendar list. If you change the color, if you change the layout, if you change the database name or the filter key and value, you probably want to set up another, or you want to recreate your sync configuration. So this is going to be our Exchange sync. I'll use my standard event management database. I'm going to sync my Exchange calendar, which is going to be all events. And so this part is very Exchange specific. We accept an email address and password, and Exchange has a service called Auto Discover, which should, through our email address and password, allow us to fetch the server host name and connect. There are some Exchange servers that don't have auto-discover enabled, and if that's the case, entering your email address and password will actually fail when you press the authenticate button, and you'll be presented with fields to manually configure. So you'll have a host name and a username and a password instead of just the email address and password. All right, so that was that. I authenticated my Exchange account. And now it's going to read from all my Exchange calendars that I have. I had already created an all events calendar in Office 365 over here. Here's my all events. So I'm going to allow it to create this new calendar for me. And I'm going to run my sync, which should copy over all my 21 records into a new calendar in Exchange. Refresh this so you can see it. And here's our Exchange calendar. So I think that I spoke a little earlier about using record level access privileges to limit access to certain calendars. I want to go into a little more detail on that. It's actually not necessary to do when syncing to Exchange or Google, because an administrator will typically be the person setting up the sync configurations, and we give you the option once you choose your FileMaker file to deselect certain calendars, I think, as you saw me do in that last demonstration. I'm going to jump back to the page real quick just to reiterate. So we have these checkboxes over on the left. So you can you must have at least one, but you can pick and choose the calendars that you want to sync. And so this is how you would limit the calendars that are visible on any individual Google user's account or Exchange user's account. When working with Apple Calendar, we don't really have that sort of granularity. So I would open up my security settings, and I would give myself a privilege set that, for instance, cannot view events that have status active. So in my events table, I can view only if my status equals active. Actually, this is going to reduce my event set. I actually want my Zulu calendar list. So I have a specific UUID over here. Unique is the name of my UUID. So I'm going to make this actually only visible if my Zulu calendar list UUID is equal to unique. Okay, so now if I were to reopen this file in FileMaker and sign in with my CalDAV account, I can't even view the events table. If I refresh from iCal, we should see my calendars disappear. I think I must have not done my access privileges correctly. But the idea is to limit the view privilege to the calendar list table, and that actually just removes the calendars. Any more questions? Okay, so I'm going to jump to another question. The question was, when setting up, if I have an existing calendar, will data from the calendar populate the FileMaker file? Yes, it will. And depending on the data that you have in FileMaker, it may or may not match up with records that you already have. So if you Yes, this applies only to Google and Exchange. If you have an existing calendar in Apple Calendar, we're not going to be able to pull in events from existing calendars because we're the server. So Apple Calendar, iCal, CalDAV works a little bit differently than the synchronization. We're actually publishing those calendars as opposed to connecting to a calendar that may exist already. So I have another question here that asks about. Differences in Google and CalDAV and Exchange with all-day events, and the rule of thumb for all-day events. The question is asking about best practices. The rule of thumb for all-day events is an all-day event has no time. There's no start time. There's no end time, and the start and end dates are a day apart. So if you had an all-day event that was today, your start date would be August the 18th, and your end date would be August the 19th. As long as there's no times, then Zulu knows that that's an all-day event, and it should reflect that way in Google and Exchange. So I've had a request to show a simple demonstration of connecting to an iCal calendar. So I'm just going to connecting. Okay, so I'm just going to jump over to my FileMaker file really quickly and demonstrate. I'll start with the publishing process. It's very quick, so it won't take me long. So we publish. We're using our full access account, so we have both calendars available to us. Just going to open up this section header right here and copy my URL. And this gives you some brief instructions on how to set it up as well. So if you can always visit our documentation site at docs.360works.com for a more in-depth walkthrough of how to accomplish this. So here we are in calendar. I'm actually going to go disable that record level privilege that I did earlier because I apparently did it wrong. There we go. All right, so I've removed the account, so you can see I've got only my built-in default calendars in iCal. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to Accounts, which will open up System Preferences, and I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom and choose Add Other Account. We operate using the CalDAV protocol, so we're going to select CalDAV, Create, and then switch the account type to Manual. We're going to use the username and password. You'll notice that I'm not using the admin no password account, and the reason why is because Apple Calendar doesn't actually support accounts that don't have passwords. So we had to create a special user account just for iCal. However, most of the time when you're deploying calendars in an existing file that contains event data, you have a username and password already. And you can definitely use existing privilege sets and existing accounts to publish Zulu. You don't have to create a special account just for Zulu. So I'm going to paste in that URL that I copied from this page. And I'm going to press Create. And I'm done. If I had more events, we're only syncing with maybe 20 events here, but if I had more events, then this would take a little bit longer. But that's all you have to do. That's the last step. You just let iCal do its thing and pull in the events.
Let's wrap it up. Okay.
All right, guys. So I think that just about wraps up our presentation for the day. I want to thank everybody for joining and attending this webinar. If you have any questions for me, feel free to email infobox@360works.com or give us a call, and we'll give us a call at 770-234-9293.
We will respond to the questions.
We'll also respond to the remainder of the questions that were asked during the webinar, and all that information will get posted on the FM Academy website. Thank you guys very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.